Okay, mic check. 1, 2, 3. Can you try yours?
Check, check, check.
Oh, maybe the switch needs to get flipped.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Okay, everything seems to be good. All right, yeah, we'll get started. Thanks for waiting, everybody, bearing with us for the rough start, and thanks for coming out. For those of us joining us for the first time, we're Edmontunes. We're a independent underground music club at the University of Alberta, founded in 2021. So, oh no, sorry, 2021 is not last year. 2022. No, 2022 is still not last year. 2023. Sorry. The passage of time is very foggy. Today is our second guest talk where we invite a member of the Edmonton local music scene to come over and talk about their experiences in the Edmonton music scene. And today we have Sid Normal to come and talk to us about her experiences. So big round of applause. And welcome, Sid. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So why don't we start out with just like a short little self-introduction about yourself and your work.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Sid. My last name is actually Tchaikovsky, not Normal, but Sid Normal is like my kind of like music alias, or like one of them. And yeah, I was born in Edmonton. And
sorry, if you could get the mic close.
Yeah,
we just need to record for the
of course,
recording. Yeah.
My bad, sorry. Yeah, and I've been doing music, since I was a kid. Realistically, just kind of like fooling around. And yeah, I've done all sorts of genres, but right now, you're just playing the sort of like more experimental music that I make. I haven't actually been making experimental music very long. I would say maybe for about a few years. Normally, I actually make a lot more sort of like beat-heavy electronic music, or like punk music. I've like done that, and post-punk and all that fun stuff. And yeah, I think I started off playing experimental music at the beginning of the pandemic just because I needed a way to kind of like manage the stress of and the anxiety of like just dealing with the pandemic when it like first started. So yeah, that's kind of like a super high level, like brief history of like, I guess like the psychic chamber stuff and kind of like where it came from. So
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So you mentioned you had like many aliases. Could you just like briefly walk us through each one of them and what those were involved?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess like, I don't know, as a teenager, I mean, played in a lot of bands that like, there's no recordings or anything. It's just kind of like silly, like, oh, let's play our friend's basement party, like just as like a fun thing to do. Yeah, so like not really like, I don't know, I can't even remember half the names. Like I'm sure there's like lots of folks who have this experience where, you just like, oh, let's make a stupid like one-off band and like play a show, and then you never record anything and you kind of like keep changing the name over and over again. So yeah, but I think I started like doing things more seriously like in my 20s. And I started off with like a band called, it was just like my brother and I, called Blood Bitch. And we did like post-punk music. So I want to say like 2010, 2011, maybe 2012, we kind of started. And it was just like a drum machine, and then I played bass and sang, and then he played guitar. We did that for a few years, and then we kind of just like, it kind of came to its like natural end. And then, yeah, I'm trying to think of what else I did. That's kind of like, after that, I started moving into more, I would say like EBM music, like more body kind of music, and more like electro, like new electro, more like techno kind of focused. And I did that for a while. I'm still doing that. It's just like experimental music is kind of like has been more of my focus as of late. But yeah, the aliases for that were Nag, I started doing nag just, by myself. And it was more like, again, it was more like EBM, kind of like body music. And it was just like me like screaming around the stage and just kind of freaking out with, some like sequences and stuff like in the background. And yeah, that was really fun. But then I kind of was like, well, I don't want to sing anymore. I want to be like in front of my gear when I'm playing, just because like, I just, as a musician, you get bored and you just want to do something else for a bit, right? So yeah, and then I started doing something called floor function. I have no recordings also. Like I don't know why. I can kind of like talk about maybe why afterwards, but because it's kind of funny and silly. But yeah, I started doing floor function right after NAG. I only played one show as floor function, and that was like no singing, just like electronic, more sort of like acidy kind of like electronic, like electro stuff, with like lots of samples. And then, yeah, right now, like, I don't know, I have a project that I haven't played a show and I haven't like released any music under yet, but it's coming, called Mr. DNA. And I'm very excited for that. And it's going to be kind of going back to that more like electro, but maybe focusing a bit more of like elements of, I guess like more like lo-fi kind of techno. So it's sort of like trying to bring that element into it. Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't think I have any other aliases that I've like done music under that I can remember right now. But yeah, I get bored and, I'm like, oh, I got to try this. And then, just jump from like project to project because I get very bored easily. So
Yeah, it's a great way to switch it up without committing to like, completely new thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Just put on a new theme. People will think it's entirely different.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I have a list of prepared questions I'm going to go through before we move on to audience Q&A, so that we can just cover some common ones. Let me just bring it up here. And we usually go through a lot of these. Well, this is only our second one so far, but we're thinking about having this as a common recurring question bank throughout all the guest talks here. So first off, I want to talk to you about your your take on the Edmonton scene. First off, so you are like mostly you have been for the most of your career just based in Edmonton, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely like done some, shows in other cities and stuff, but like never been like a true part of any other music scene except for Edmonton.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And first off, what would you say is your most favorite aspect or aspects of the Edmonton scene? Like what makes it stand out from other locations across the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from my experience, the Edmonton music scene is very like, I want to say, like unpretentious. Like maybe there's a bit of that. So like I don't know. I'm sure it exists everywhere, like to a certain degree. But from my experience, it's been very, very much kind of like people welcome you. For the most part, everyone's usually pretty friendly and nice. And another thing that I really, that I really appreciate about the Edmonton music scene is that there doesn't seem to be like a lot of, people with an attitude of being like too cool to like be humble and be like, approach each other and say, hey, I like your music, I like what you're doing kind of thing. People will kind of be able to approach other artists and, just kind of like be open and, outwardly like appreciative. I think that like, I don't know, playing music in other cities, like obviously that happens everywhere. Like it's not like a unique thing to Edmonton, of course. But I remember I was playing a show in New York like a few years ago, and my friend was like almost like preparing me for like what was going to happen, and he was like, yeah, don't be like concerned if you're playing and people are just like standing there looking at your gear and like scrutinizing your setup and just like sitting there with their arms crossed, and like not like basically like not being into your music, like just standing there. And I remember thinking to myself like, yeah, okay, sure, I'm sure that's gonna happen, and that's exactly what happened. I was like so shocked, yeah, because it was like, and like I thought like maybe one or two people might do that, I'm sure, like whatever, but it was like so pretentious. I was like, my mind was blown. And yeah, almost like the armor that people put up in those sort of social spaces, for whatever reason, like maybe they think it's like uncool or something to like I don't know, put themselves in that situation. I don't know. I couldn't really like say for sure, but that's what it felt like to me. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of that in the Edmonton music scene. Like, like I have no problem like going up to musicians that I like their work of, and even people that I'm playing a show with, and say like, hey, that was a great set, or I love what you're doing, and my name's Sid, nice to meet you, kind of thing. Like that aspect is great. Yeah, I think so. I think just like the attitude is generally one that's like really good. It'll be interesting to see what happens when the population grows, and just it. I don't know. The Edmonton music scene just gets bigger and bigger, but like hopefully that, I guess, like that attitude just keeps being a thing. Yeah.
Okay, great. And I think actually many people will agree with this point as well.
Yeah.
Myself included. Yeah, enjoy it while it lasts. Pretentiousness arms race might start up very soon with the amount of population growth we're having. So you said you started out kind of more into post-punk and more punk style music, and then what kind of started to draw you towards the more dance and electronic side of things?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think the sort of experimental aspects of electronic music really started to pull me in. Like I think that, like listening to music with like weird like samples and things like that, I was like, oh, like this is really interesting sounding. So I think it was just like, yeah, I think it was, bands and projects that like were using samples in a really interesting way, and that sort of just got my attention. And I also think too, like I've been into like really like lo-fi kind of like, acid house, like techno, that stuff, because of just like I don't know, it just sounds so like warm yet distant. It's like this weird feeling of like, this sort of like, a lot of folks like will record on like, like analog equipment and like run it through DAW and, use tape emulators and what have you. And, it just sounds really cool. It just sounds really like gritty. I like the grittiness. I love, yeah, the sort of, like, honestly, it feels like, looking back, it feels like it feels like it was a way to get into like ambient and like weird experimental music. It was like the gateway to that, which, I mean, post-punk is great. I still love post-punk and punk music, but it's like that stuff happens less and less, I think, in those genres. And I think like, it's great for what it is, but I don't really know of any like post-punk bands that are like using like, like samples and stuff in their music. Maybe they are, or like at the beginning of a song or something, to kind of make it a bit more atmospheric sounding. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just like, I don't know, I think I got drawn into that world because of those reasons. So
cool.
Yeah.
I actually forgot we were gonna play a couple of your songs before we switched over to this
Sure.
segment.
Yeah.
Are there any specific selections you would like to pinpoint and showcase?
Oh, I don't know. I think like anything on the album would be cool. I don't know. I honestly like, yeah. I think maybe like DNA Garden or something, or like, yeah.
All right, so tell us a bit about this song, like how you came, like what inspired you, like what kind of mindset were you in, what kind of environment were you in when you came up with this one?
Yeah, so this entire album was like kind of like conceptually formed around like the idea of like I wanted to almost like create like a world, basically. Like I was thinking about like it's kind of silly, but I was like, okay, it would be kind of cool if I made like this like soundscape album around somebody like walking through a world that doesn't exist, like almost like a video game or something, like a medieval like. So I don't know. I was thinking about like this like fake medieval like video game world. And yeah, I don't know specifically about like that song. Because I can't remember, but like that's honestly like every song is like centered around that. So yeah.
Okay. Well, here's DNA Garden off of Psychic Chamber's Conditional States. All right, that was DNA Garden from Psychic Chamber off of her album Conditional States. And as you can hear, if it's the first time hearing Psychic Chamber, you can obviously hear that the flute is the prominent instrument front and center. And while you're performing live as Psychic Chamber, you are primarily playing the flute as well. So, yeah, if you could just talk a bit about that. How did you come to have the flute as your kind of main instrument in that project? And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I have a background in like playing flute. I didn't play it for like a long time. It was basically, I'm sure like a lot of musicians can relate to this, but like, you know, you take an instrument in band in like junior high and high school. That was my situation. I played flute. And then I didn't play it for like the longest time, you know, because I was like, yeah, I play bass and drums now, you know, I play post-punk music. So, but, you know, like I mentioned at the beginning of the pandemic, I was like, I need a way to like chill out, you know, like I can't, like, I don't know. Yeah, it's just like mentally it was like that's when I really started getting into like ambient and experimental music. And I basically was like, okay, well, I know I want to experiment with this genre. I know I want to start doing this. So like realistically, like what could my setup look like? You know, because I felt personally like a bit like I don't know, I always kind of feel like I need to hide behind something when I'm like performing, like whether it's a persona or like a specific like instrument, like, I don't know, like when I was doing the floor function, like alias, I noticed that like just sitting behind my synths and my samplers and stuff, I kind of got like, I was like, oh, I feel like there's like no wall up between me and the audience, and that like freaked me out. So I was like, okay, well, knowing that I want to be like performing and stuff, like what could I like use to kind of like put a barrier in between me and the audience? So I was like, maybe flute, like I used to play flute, like maybe I can, you know, just screw around with that, like, and, you know, put it through some like weird effects, and that way I'm like doing something, and I, you know, not to say that like being in front of synth and samplers is like not doing something, but to me it felt like, you know, like, yeah. Actually, I think the reason why it doesn't feel like I'm doing something is because I'm so anxious when I play shows that like a lot of stuff is already like, I have like the full set basically like programmed. And I know a lot of folks like, you know, who are doing like live stuff like that, they'll just kind of like, you know, like do that on the fly. But I'm like, I have so much anxiety that something's going to go wrong that I like, it's all planned out. So I was like, okay, well, what can I do on top of that, basically? Like, and also, how can I hide? So yeah, that was kind of the impetus for like why I decided to do flute. And also like, you know, doing like that kind of experimental, like new agey kind of sound. I was like, flute is like perfect for that. So that was like another reason. Yeah. Yeah.
For sure. Let me see. So, where do you usually, like, when you start out making a song, where do you take inspiration? Usually, is it just from like daily life kind of experiences, or like do you take more inspiration from other music or other works of art? Where did it start out for you?
Yeah, I think it's very like I don't know. I would say that, you know, I'm inspired a lot by other musicians, and there's so many good musicians in Edmonton, and just like around in the scene. So, you know, seeing shows like, you know, I'll go and like watch people play, and I'm like, oh, I gotta, you know, I gotta get in front of my gear and make something. Like, it was so inspirational to see that. So yeah, I think like there's a certain degree of like extrinsic motivation there, and like I guess like inspiration, but then also, and I'm sure like a lot of artists and musicians can like relate to this, because I think it's like honestly like the primary drive to like even make art in the first place, but like just processing emotions and like working through something that like you don't have like the capacity for like language like doesn't allow you to like do, basically. Like you have to like, it's like you take this feeling and then you process it, and like that's one of the only ways maybe that you can like do that, or it allows you to do it in a way that like other forms of like expression just like don't allow for. So for me it always feels like it's very like it starts off with like this inner sort of like desire and like almost need, I would say. Like it's a need to kind of like get something out, and then once you are able to kind of like get it out and externalize it through this medium, then you can kind of like move on. And I honestly think like, because sometimes I'll like look back at things that I've recorded or done, and I get really embarrassed because I'm like, oh, I don't know, that's so embarrassing. And maybe that's like a silly attitude to have, but I don't know, it's just like you're your own worst critic, I guess. But yeah, I think that's part of the reason why it feels so embarrassing for me, is because I'm like, it reminds me of like the thing that I was going through. And it can be a bit cringe, but like, yeah, it's just a process, right? So, but yeah, that's kind of like the main drive, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so coming back to the Edmonton scene, you mentioned you got inspired a lot by your fellow musicians here as well. Where do you see the Edmonton scene going? Like, where do you see this trajectory heading in the future? Do you think, like, in terms of like just in like basic level of general activity and a level of like engagedness and like the scale of things, or in terms of like specific directions and styles and genres and people that people are interested in? What are your outlooks?
Yeah, I guess like it will be interesting to see, I guess, you know. I feel like Edmonton, like the music scene is kind of in this sweet spot where like I kind of alluded to this earlier, where it feels like pretty small still. Like it's huge, but it feels small. Like maybe there's just like really tight connections between like specific groups, I guess. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, I guess, what happens when Edmonton's population keeps growing and the music scene population therefore keeps growing as well, just to see, you know, will we still have that sort of those same connections? And yeah, I don't know. I guess genre-wise, it'll be interesting to see what happens with genres that are sort of more on the fringe, and where there might be like one or two artists in the city, or maybe like a small handful of artists making a specific type of music, or a genre of music. Like, yeah, it'll be interesting, I guess, just to see what happens. Like, hopefully, like just more weird shit just starts happening. I mean, that's cool and weird stuff is happening now, but I just want more. So yeah. Yeah, I don't know. That was maybe not a terribly insightful answer, but yeah.
that was great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not at all. Okay. I think we'll finish off this segment with our last question that we always do for the second time. For anyone who's looking to get into the Edmonton scene and be active in it, do you have any advice, any words to give?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think like the first thing I would recommend is just being really connected to like what you want to do. If you want to be just somebody who's like a basement producer and you don't really want to you don't have the capacity to network, and you're just I don't want to play shows, I just want to release music. I don't know, just that's fine. But then also I spent a long time as a musician just being really being kind of bitter and jealous of people who were in the scene, and kind of being a bit distant and an observer. And then I just realized one day that I was I mean, it might seem really common sense to everyone, but for me, I was just I guess I have to talk to people if I want to, if I want to do music. I don't know, because I'm getting better, but I was kind of a weird shy freak, and I just thought that if I made cool music that people would just know who I was, which is unfortunately not always the case, right? So yeah, I guess my advice would just be know what you want, and if what you want requires talking to people, you gotta do it. And I don't know, just don't be afraid to talk to people too. I don't know. I think just yeah, be open to I guess talking to people, and just knowing that most people are going to be pretty friendly, and I don't know, I do this thing where I'm oh, I follow that person on Instagram, I have to pretend I don't know them because I haven't met them, and I'm I just had this realization where I was why would I they probably want to talk to me too, if they follow me on Instagram, why wouldn't I just go over and introduce myself? It's such a weird thing for me to think. So just I think getting out of your own head, if you're a person who does that sometimes, like I am, just getting out of your head and just taking initiative, and it is hard sometimes too, and I think musicians generally tend to be the type of people usually who are a bit anxious, and a bit maybe have some trepidation about doing things like that, but I guess I don't know, just with practice it gets easier, and it's I don't know, chill, and most people are nice. So yeah, I'm giving myself my self in the past my own advice, I guess.
That's an excellent advice. Yeah, especially in Edmonton.
Yeah,
might not work in New York.
No, you would get eaten alive. People would be what are you doing? Don't talk to me.
Okay, on that note, we'll turn it over to the audience. If you have any questions, raise your hand and I'll hand you the mic. Okay, Camilo first, I guess. Yep.
Yeah, I was curious about, you were talking about your interest in sample-based music, and I was curious if you took much influence from the plunderphonics kind of movement, and people like Oneotrix, Point Never, or if you just had any other influences in general with that.
Yeah, I love OPN a lot, and I think that excuse me, not so much that genre, but my favorite producer of all time is Lego Walt. I don't know if anyone else yeah. So I think the way that he uses samples and his use of like experimental sort of like unexpected sample-based things in music is just like so cool, and I love it. So, yeah.
Okay. What musician was that?
Oh, Lego Welt. Lego Welt. Lego Welt.
Oh, Lego.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I think you had your hand up first.
What type of stuff do you like sampling for your music?
Yeah.
The question
Oh, yeah.
was, what type of stuff do you like to sample for your music? Just to leave for the recording.
Yeah. So I really love to honestly just like sample basically, okay, anything that I can find that I usually go on like YouTube and just like search for like 70s Canadian sci-fi shows, because like they didn't have the budget to have like music in the background. So I like try to find like really like kind of poorly produced television shows that don't have music in the background, because like then you have to like try to like mix the audio out of the like the thing that someone's saying. Oh yeah, I guess I should say I like using like people speaking a lot of times. And I like to kind of like run that through Ableton. And I like to use a simpler feature in Ableton, and you just kind of slice it up and like make a new sample out of the thing. So I like to get like really weird and experimental with it. Yeah.
All right, great question. Thing.
I was wondering if there's any artists that use flute that inspire you particularly, because the piece you played kind of reminded me of Emerald Webb a bit or something like that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm kind of blanking on a bunch of different artists, but like there's a few artists that like there's one like artist that makes like new like contemporary music, but it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like electronic based, but there's also like, it's not ambient music, but it is like, there's an experimental like aspect to it. And this response would be a lot better if I remembered her name. But yeah, I think I like, it's on my phone, but I can like look it up and I can like let you know. Yeah, there's lots of other people who play flute that are very inspirational, but like I have the worst memory, and I basically would need a list in front of me to remember. So not a very great answer, I'm sorry.
Okay, Jason's closer, so first you, and then we'll move on.
So considering the nature of the music that you make, and you talk about combining like DAW stuff with like analog, I'm guessing like occasionally you like find yourself finding or discovering new techniques or little tricks or new workflows that you might incorporate into your music. So if you ever like are experimenting and find something new and you're like, oh, this is cool, do you like immediately go and like, I'm gonna make this in a song right now? Or do you kind of stow that away and you're like, I'm gonna keep this, save it for later?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. So I think it's kind of like a combination of both. Like I sometimes will sit on an idea or like a technique. Like about a year or so ago, I was like, oh, if you run tapes like that already, like that other musicians, like, you know, like an audio tape, like, you know, from, you grab like a Metallica like tape from Value Village or something, and you run it through like an 8-track or something like that. It like, I don't know why, I'm sure somebody can tell me why this happens, like, but it's just like double the speed or like triple the speed or something. And I was like, oh, this sounds really weird. So I like sampled it into my DAW and then slowed it down, and like I don't know, it just has like such a cool quality. And then I like made like a loop out of it, and, you know, like did some other, like I put like a tape emulator on top of the tape and like did some other fun stuff, and it just sounds like so weird. And I haven't made any songs out of this technique just yet, but, you know, that's like a scenario where I would discover like something and like I would sit on it. But yeah, other times, you know, I'm like, I have to make this, I have to do like something with this right now. So it really just depends on, and it depends on my capacity and like my interest in, you know, that idea at the time. So yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any personal favorites in the local scene that you would recommend?
Yeah, okay, so, oh my gosh, I wrote out a list because there's so many amazing musicians. Some of them are in this room, but yeah, I think, let me just find here. So there's a few, there's a few like labels in the city that are really cool. But before I talk about them, Pseudo Antigone, you're sitting here, is doing really cool hyperpop. Wares as well. And yeah, Ethan, like everything that Ethan is doing is so cool. Under your label, which is Saw Wet. And yeah, there's also, let's see here, another label that my tape is out on, just called Pseudo Laboratories. And that label does really cool sort of like experimental like tape noise stuff. And yeah, there's all sorts of cool stuff from Parker Thiessen and Ian Rowley, who are the founders of that label. Yeah, Kelly Ruth is somebody who's on that label too, and she does like harp. It is really cool. Chris Burwash, also another ambient person. Boris, I don't know if anyone knows Boris. Boris is so cool. Yeah, there's just so many cool things happening. Mustafa Rafiq is also doing some really cool with the Tick Leaf Ensemble.
We're trying to get in for April.
Yeah. Oh.
Hopefully.
Yeah, just so cool. Yeah, there's just such amazing music in Edmonton, and it's just great. Yeah, I'm sure I'm like forgetting like half of my friends. That's another thing. Like all of my friends just have like such good music projects, and so it's like, yeah, it's difficult to remember everything, especially on the spot here. But yeah, no, lots of cool stuff happening. Yeah.
Hello. I just had a question regarding specifically the use of like new age music. That sound is kind of really interesting to me, but I know it has a sort of status of being like, you know, racist and lazy or whatever, but it's a really fascinating palette, and I was curious why you gravitated towards it.
Yeah, no, that's a good call out too. I think honestly, like it wasn't new age really that I was like drawn to at first. It was more like ambient and experimental. I just thought that like, you know, because I played flute, that I should play flute over top of it. And I think because of that, it sounds like super new agey, right? Because it's a flute. Yeah, it wasn't my intention to like really make something that sounded like that, but I guess it was my intention at the same time. Yeah. But yeah, I think I'm totally aligned with that like sentiment as well. So it is a bit complicated, but yeah, I don't know. New age is like fine, I guess, but I don't like, you know, go out and actively like seek listening to it because of those reasons. So, but yeah, it's more of the experimental ambient thing that I was going after. I think if it was like a different instrument besides flute that I was playing, that it would sound like it probably wouldn't sound like new age, but yeah.
All right. Are there any like really good pressing questions left? Okay. If you think of one later, come and ask Sid directly. I'm not going to keep anyone waiting any longer while the pizza's wafting over everybody's noses. So with that, we'll wrap this up for today. And thank you. Round of applause again for Sid.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.